Alarms tore through the listening station on the edge of human space, and every operator in the room froze at once. The signal on the main screen was not static. It was a voice, broken and desperate, speaking in a language no database could translate. But the meaning behind it needed no translation at all. Someone, somewhere, was calling for help, and they were calling with the last strength they had. Lieutenant Grace Hale stood over the console, her eyes locked on the pulsing waveform. She had worked at this outpost for 3 years, and in that time, she had heard countless signals from drifting satellites, old wreckage, and cosmic noise. This was different. There was a rhythm to it, a pattern that repeated every few seconds, like a heartbeat refusing to stop even as it grew weaker. "Isolate the source," she said, her voice steady, despite the tightness in her chest. "I want a location, now." The technician beside her, a young man named Oliver Bramwell, worked quickly, his fingers moving across the controls. Numbers scrolled past, coordinates locking into place one after another. When the final position appeared on the screen, the room fell silent. The signal was coming from a system far beyond any mapped human territory, a region the colonial charts simply labeled as unknown. "That's outside our reach," Oliver said quietly. "Nobody has ever been out there." Grace did not answer right away. She kept watching the waveform, listening to the broken rhythm of the message as it repeated again and again. Whoever was sending it did not know if anyone would ever hear it. They were sending it anyway. Within the hour, the recording had been sent up the chain of command, all the way to Colonel Daniel Marsh, a man known across the fleet for his steady judgment and his refusal to let politics slow him down when lives were at stake. Marsh sat alone in his office, aboard the command station Horizon Reach, replaying the signal for the 5th time. He was not a scientist, and he could not understand the words, but he understood tone, and this tone was unmistakable. Fear, desperation, a plea from someone who believed help might never come, but who called out anyway because the alternative was silence. He requested an emergency session with the Colonial Council the same night. The council chamber was tense the following morning. A dozen officials sat around a curved table, screens glowing with data pulled from the intercepted transmission. Marsh stood at the front, his hands folded behind his back, waiting for the arguments to begin. He knew they would. "We know nothing about who sent this," said Councillor Priyanandan, her tone sharp and cautious. "We do not know their intentions, their capabilities, or what dangers surround them. Sending our people into an unknown system, based on a signal we cannot even translate, would be reckless." "With respect," Marsh replied, "the signal does not need translation. Every living being understands what it means to call for help when there is no one else to call. If we ignore this, we are not being careful. We are choosing to look away." A murmur passed through the room. Councillor Edward Whitfield, an older man with decades of service behind him, leaned forward. "And if this is a trap, if this signal is bait, meant to lure us into unfamiliar territory, then we will be careful," Marsh said. "I am not asking to send the entire fleet. I am asking for one unit. Skilled, disciplined, and small enough to observe before we commit to anything larger. If it is a trap, we will see it before we walk into it. If it is real, then somewhere out there, a people who have never heard of Earth are hoping that someone, anyone, will answer." The room stayed quiet for a long moment. Finally, Councillor Nandan spoke again, her voice softer this time. "One unit. Observation only, unless lives are in immediate danger. And Colonel, if this becomes something bigger than we can control, you pull back immediately." Marsh nodded once. Understood. By evening, the order had been sent to the 3rd Shadow Battalion, a Marine unit built for exactly this kind of mission. Small, fast, and used to operating without support far from home. Their commanding officer, Captain Ethan Cole, received the briefing in his quarters, aboard the transport ship Meridian. He read it twice before calling his senior team together. The team gathered in the briefing room within minutes. Sergeant Naomi Ward arrived first, her expression unreadable as always, followed by Corporal Liam Ashby, still adjusting his uniform from an earlier drill. Behind them came Specialist Ines Delgado, sharp-eyed and quick to ask questions, and finally Private Noah Whitlock, the youngest of the group, who tried and mostly failed to hide his nerves whenever a new mission was announced. Cole did not waste time with long speeches. He pulled up the star chart on the briefing screen and pointed to the flashing marker at its edge. 6 hours ago, a distress signal was picked up from this system, he said. Nobody recognizes the source. Nobody knows the species. What we do know is that it sounds like someone in serious trouble, and Command wants us to find out who and why. Naomi studied the chart carefully. That's a long way past anything we've mapped. It is, Cole agreed, which means we go in slow, we go in quiet, and we do not make ourselves known until we understand what we're looking at. Observation first. If we see innocent lives in danger, we act. If we see something we can't handle, we report back and let Command decide the next step. Noah shifted in his seat. And if it's a trap, then we'll see it coming before it sees us, Cole said simply. That's the job. The mission was set for departure within the day. As the crew prepared the ship, Cole found a quiet moment to stand near the observation window, looking out at the stars scattered across the dark. He had led missions into dangerous places before, chasing down pirates, rescuing stranded colonists, defending outposts from raiders who thought no one was watching. But this was different. This time, whatever waited on the other side of that signal was not human, and he had no idea what they would find when they arrived. Still, one thought stayed with him as the engines began to hum to life beneath his feet. Somewhere out there, someone was afraid, and someone was calling for help. That was enough reason to go. The Meridian slipped away from Horizon Reach that night, carrying 5 Marines and a mission that would take them further from home than any of them had ever traveled. Behind them, the familiar lights of human space grew smaller and smaller, until there was nothing but darkness ahead, and a single flickering signal pulling them forward. None of them could have guessed what they were truly walking into. The distress call was only the beginning, a single cry from a much larger storm still building in the dark beyond the stars, one that was about to reach far closer to home than anyone in that council chamber had dared to imagine. As the ship pushed deeper into unfamiliar space, sensors began picking up faint traces the crew had never seen before, drifting debris, strange energy readings, and something else. Something that made even the calm and steady Sergeant Naomi Ward tighten her grip on the console in front of her. "Captain," she said quietly, "you need to see this." Cole crossed the bridge and looked at the screen. Scattered across the outer edge of the unknown system were pieces of wreckage, dozens of them, tumbling silently through the void. Some were small, barely larger than a shuttle. Others were massive, twisted shapes that had clearly once been something far greater. "Debris field," Oliver's voice crackled faintly through the long-range comm relay from the outpost, still monitoring their progress from a great distance. Whatever caused that, it happened fast. Cole stared at the wreckage drifting past the viewport, his jaw tightening. Whatever had sent that signal, whatever civilization was crying out for help, something out there had already tried to silence them. And the Marines of the Meridian were now the only ones close enough to answer. The ship pressed onward into the dark, carrying its crew toward a system none of them fully understood, guided only by a broken signal and the quiet certainty that somewhere ahead, someone was still waiting for help to arrive. The Meridian slowed as it crossed into the heart of the unknown system, and what the crew saw through the viewport silenced every voice on the bridge. Ahead of them hung a planet wrapped in orbital rings of shattered metal, remnants of stations and ships that had once formed a thriving network above its surface. Fires still burned in places, tiny orange sparks visible even from a distance, marking where structures continued to break apart in the vacuum of space. "That's not debris from an accident," Naomi said, her voice low. "That's what's left after an attack." Cole leaned closer to the display, studying the wreckage pattern. The destruction was not random. It followed a clear direction, as if something had swept through the system in organized waves, targeting specific points, rather than causing chaos for its own sake. Whoever had done this knew exactly what they were doing. "Enos, scan for life signs," Cole ordered. Specialist Enos Delgado's fingers moved rapidly across her console. Within moments, faint readings appeared, scattered and weak, but present. "I'm picking up survivors, Captain." "A lot of them, mostly clustered near the planet's surface and in a few of the larger orbital structures that are still holding together." "Then they're not finished yet," Cole said. "Bring us in closer, But keep us dark. I want eyes on this before we make any decisions." The ship drifted nearer, its systems running silent, cutting off every unnecessary emission that might give away their presence. As they approached, the source of the destruction became clear. A fleet of unfamiliar warships moved through the wreckage field with methodical precision, firing on fleeing transports that had no way to defend themselves. The ships were angular and dark, marked with jagged patterns that seemed designed to intimidate as much as to function. "Those transports," Noah said, watching the screen with wide eyes. "They're not fighting back at all." "They can't," Ines confirmed, scanning the readings. "Their technology isn't built for combat. Look at the design. It's all efficiency and life support, nothing built to strike back. Whoever these people are, they never expected to need weapons." Cole watched as one of the fleeing transports was struck, sending debris scattering in a wide arc, and something in his chest tightened painfully. He had followed orders for years, watched conflicts from a professional distance, made calculated decisions in the heat of dangerous situations. But this was not a conflict. This was a slaughter, one-sided and merciless, carried out against people who had no way to protect themselves. He turned to his team. "Command told us to observe unless lives were in immediate danger. Look at that screen. Tell me those lives aren't in danger right now." Naomi met his gaze without hesitation. "They are, Captain." "Then we're done watching," Cole said. "Ines, find me a way to reach that transport before it's destroyed. Liam, prep the shuttle. We're going in." The crew moved quickly, adrenaline replacing hesitation as training took over. The Meridian broke its silence and surged forward, weaving between drifting wreckage as it closed the distance toward the damaged transport. Warning signals blared across the bridge as one of the attacking warships noticed their approach and began to turn. "They've spotted us," Oliver's voice crackled through the comm, still tracking their progress from the distant outpost. "Captain, you are now visible to a hostile force with unknown capabilities. Command needs a status update. Tell them we're saving lives," Cole said firmly. "Details later." The Meridian's engines roared as Cole guided the ship into a tight arc, placing it directly between the attacking warship and the crippled transport. The move was risky, exposing them fully, but it worked. The warship's next strike glanced off the Meridian's shielding instead of finishing off the helpless vessel it had been hunting. "Shields holding," Liam called out from his station. "But not for long if they keep that up." "They won't have the chance," Cole said. "Naomi, get a tractor beam locked onto that transport. We're pulling it clear." The next few minutes passed in controlled chaos. Naomi worked the controls with practiced precision, locking the beam onto the damaged transport, as Cole maneuvered the Meridian to keep them shielded from further attacks. The warship pressed closer, weapons charging for another strike, but Cole anticipated the movement and rolled the ship sideways at the last possible moment, letting the attack pass harmlessly through empty space. "Transport secured," Naomi announced. "Pulling them in now." Slowly, painstakingly, the crippled vessel was drawn toward the Meridian's docking bay, its hull scorched and battered but intact. Cole kept his focus on the warship, watching for any sign it might follow, but to his surprise, it peeled away instead, retreating back toward the larger fleet still gathered near the planet. "They're pulling back," Ines said, confusion evident in her voice. "Why would they do that?" "Maybe we're not what they expected," Cole said. "Or maybe they're regrouping. Either way, we don't have time to wonder. Get that transport secured and get our medical team ready. Whoever's on board is going to need help." The docking bay doors sealed shut behind the rescued transport, and the Marines moved quickly to open its hatch. What emerged from inside was unlike anything any of them had seen before. Tall, slender figures with pale, luminous skin stepped cautiously into the bay, their large eyes blinking rapidly against the brighter light of the human ship. They moved with obvious injury, some supporting others, all of them clearly exhausted beyond measure. Noah lowered his weapon immediately, staring in stunned silence. Even Naomi, usually unshakable, paused for a long moment before stepping forward with her hands visibly empty and open, a universal gesture of peace she hoped would translate across whatever barrier of language and culture separated them. One of the figures stepped forward from the group, taller than the others, with markings along their arms that seemed to denote some kind of rank or role. They looked at Naomi, then at Cole, studying the humans with an expression that mixed fear and cautious hope in equal measure. "We mean you no harm," Cole said slowly, holding up his own empty hands. "We heard your call. We came to help." The figure did not respond immediately, clearly unable to understand the words, but something in Cole's tone or posture seemed to register. Slowly, the tension in the room began to ease, replaced by a fragile, uncertain trust. Cole turned to Ines. "Get the translation systems working as fast as you can. We need to understand what happened here, and we need to understand it now." Over the following hours, as the medical team tended to the wounded survivors, Ines worked tirelessly alongside a young member of the rescued group, who introduced themselves through gestures and patience as Sael. Piece by piece, using diagrams, symbols, and simple repeated phrases, they began building a fragile bridge of understanding between two species who had never known the other existed until that day. What they learned chilled every Marine on board. The attacking fleet did not belong to a random band of raiders. They were organized, disciplined, and had been targeting Sael's people, known as the Veltari, for months, stripping their outposts of technology and resources before moving on to the next target. The Veltari were not a warlike people. They had built their civilization around creation, discovery, and connection, never anticipating a need for weapons or defense. "They never saw this coming," Ines said quietly to Cole, once the initial translation work had settled enough to summarize. "They didn't build anything to fight back, because they never imagined they would need to." Cole looked through the observation window toward the planet still burning in the distance, its rings of wreckage a silent testament to what happens when peaceful people meet those who see only opportunity in their weakness. He thought of the Council's warning to observe only, to avoid unnecessary risk, to protect human interests above all else. He thought of the burning transports, the desperate signal, the fragile trust now forming in the eyes of the survivors, gathered in his ship's medical bay. "Send a full report to command," he said finally. "Tell them exactly what we found. Tell them these people need more than observation. They need help, real help, and we're the only ones close enough to give it." As the message was prepared and sent across the vast distance back toward human space, Cole remained by the window, watching the wreckage drift silently in the dark. Whatever came next, whatever decision command made in response to his report, one thing had already become clear to him and to every member of his crew. They had crossed a line the moment they pulled that transport to safety, and there would be no going back to simply watching from the shadows. Somewhere among the survivors resting quietly in the medical bay, a young Veltari named Sael sat with hands trembling, staring at the strange humans who had appeared from nowhere and pulled them from near destruction. For the first time since the attacks began, there was something other than fear in their expression. There was hope, fragile and new, but undeniably present. The Meridian remained near the wreckage through the following hours, gathering more survivors where it safely could, while the retreating warships regrouped somewhere beyond sensor range. Cole knew the calm would not last. Whatever force had done this would return, and when it did, his small crew would need to decide just how far they were willing to go, to stand between an unprotected people and the darkness closing in around them. 3 days passed aboard the Meridian, and in that time, the ship transformed from a marine transport into something closer to a refuge. More survivors had been gathered from the drifting wreckage, carefully brought aboard and settled into every available space. The medical bay overflowed into the cargo hold, and the cargo hold overflowed into the corridors, until nearly every corner of the ship held someone recovering from injury, exhaustion, or grief too heavy to put into words. Sael had become something of a fixture near the command deck, spending hours each day working alongside Ines to refine the translation systems, teaching human words in exchange for learning them. It was slow, careful work, built more on patience than technology, but it was working. Sentences that had once required minutes of gesturing now came together in seconds. "Your people," Sael said one afternoon, testing the words carefully. "You did not have to come." Ines looked up from her console, considering the question. "No," she admitted. "We didn't." "Then why?" It was a fair question, and one Ines had asked herself more than once over the past few days. She thought of the debris field, the burning transports, the desperate signal that had reached across the void with no promise anyone would answer. Because someone was calling for help, she said finally. And we could hear them. Sael said nothing for a long moment, simply studying her with those large, luminous eyes. Then, slowly, they nodded, as if the answer, simple as it was, meant more than any lengthy explanation could have. Elsewhere on the ship, Cole sat in the briefing room with Naomi and Liam, reviewing data pulled from the Veltari survivors' recovered systems. What they found painted a picture far larger and more troubling than a single attack on a single system. These aren't just raiders passing through, Naomi said, pointing to a series of connected star systems highlighted on the display. Look at the pattern. Every one of these systems belonged to the Veltari at some point. Now every single one shows the same signature of attack and withdrawal. They're not destroying everything, Liam added, studying the readings closely. They're targeting specific technology, research facilities, manufacturing centers, anything with advanced systems. The civilian population gets caught in the middle, but it looks like the real goal is resources. Cole leaned back, processing the implications. So this isn't random aggression. It's a harvesting operation. Systematic, organized, and it's been running for longer than we thought. Which raises the question, Naomi said. Why now? If they've been doing this for months without anyone stopping them, what changes when we show up? Cole did not have an answer, but he suspected they would find out soon enough. He called for Sael to join the briefing, hoping the Veltari engineer might offer insight the data alone could not provide. Sael arrived a few minutes later, glancing nervously at the unfamiliar faces gathered around the table, before settling into the seat Ines offered. Through careful translation, Cole explained what they had found, watching Sael's expression shift from confusion to dawning understanding, and finally, to something that looked very much like fear. The Korathi, Sael said quietly, once the explanation was finished. The name came out halting, unfamiliar on human ears, but unmistakably significant, based on the tension in Sael's posture. You know who they are, Cole said. Sael nodded slowly. We have heard stories. Traders from distant systems speak of them in warning, never as attackers, but as builders of something larger, a machine of war, growing somewhere beyond mapped space. We believed the stories were exaggerated. We were wrong. The room fell silent as the weight of that statement settled over everyone present. If the Korathi were not simply raiders seeking easy resources, but were instead gathering technology and materials for something far greater, then the destruction they had witnessed was not the end of a threat. It was only the beginning. We need to send this to command immediately, Naomi said. This changes everything. If there's a larger threat building beyond this system, Earth needs to know before it becomes our problem too. Cole agreed, already drafting the report in his mind. But before he could act on it, the ship's alarms blared to life, cutting through the tense quiet of the briefing room. Captain, Oliver's voice crackled urgently through the comm system, still relaying information from the distant outpost. We're detecting a large signature approaching your position. It matches the profile of the fleet from 3 days ago, but larger, much larger. Cole was on his feet immediately, moving toward the bridge with Naomi and Liam close behind. Sael followed as well, moving with the same urgency despite unfamiliarity with the ship's layout. On the bridge, the main display showed exactly what Oliver had described, a formation of warships emerging from the darkness beyond the wreckage field, far outnumbering the small patrol that had attacked days earlier. They found us, Ines said, watching the numbers climb as more ships appeared on the sensors. Or they were always planning to come back in force, Cole said grimly. Either way, we can't fight that many ships, and we can't outrun them with this many survivors aboard. The tension on the bridge was thick enough to feel, every crew member waiting for Cole's next order, aware that whatever decision came next would determine whether everyone aboard the Meridian lived to see another day. Cole studied the display for a long moment, his mind racing through options, each one carrying its own risk. Ines, status on the survivors we haven't recovered yet, he said finally. Still scattered across the wreckage field and the planet's surface, Ines reported. We estimate hundreds more, maybe thousands, still stranded. Cole's jaw tightened. Leaving now meant abandoning those people to whatever fate the returning fleet intended for them. Staying meant risking everyone already aboard the ship, along with the crew who had sworn to protect them. Naomi, he said, signal Oliver. Tell command we need reinforcements, and we need them fast. Full transparency. This is bigger than a single rescue mission now. And until they arrive? Naomi asked. Cole looked out at the approaching fleet, then back at Sael, who stood watching him, with an expression that mixed fear and desperate hope in equal measure. He thought of the burning transports, the desperate signal that had started this entire journey, and the fragile trust that had grown aboard his ship over the past 3 days. Until then, he said, we hold the line as long as we can, and we get as many people to safety as possible. Prep every shuttle we have. We're going back for the rest of them. The crew moved into action immediately, the calm of the past few days replaced by focused urgency. Liam and Noah prepared the shuttles for launch, while Naomi coordinated with the surviving Veltari to identify the locations of remaining stranded groups. Sael, despite having no combat training, insisted on joining the effort, arguing that knowledge of the terrain and the remaining Veltari infrastructure would prove invaluable in locating survivors quickly. Cole hesitated only briefly before agreeing. Stay close to Naomi, and if things go wrong, you get to a shuttle immediately. Understood? Sael nodded, determination replacing fear in their expression. Understood. As the shuttles launched from the Meridian's docking bay, spreading out across the wreckage field toward the last known locations of stranded survivors, the approaching Karathi fleet grew steadily closer on the main display. Cole remained on the bridge, watching the numbers with a growing sense of urgency, aware that every minute spent searching for survivors was a minute closer to direct confrontation with a force far larger than anything his small crew could hope to withstand alone. The first shuttle reached its target within minutes, a partially destroyed research outpost still clinging to a fragment of what had once been a larger station. Naomi led the team inside, weapons ready but lowered, calling out in the few Veltari phrases she had learned over the past days. Slowly, cautiously, survivors emerged from hiding places within the wreckage, drawn by the sound of a language, however broken, that offered some hint of safety. Elsewhere, Liam's team located a group sheltering within the twisted remains of a transport vessel, its hull scorched, but its interior largely intact. The survivors there were in worse condition, injuries left untreated for days, but alive nonetheless. Liam worked quickly alongside his team, stabilizing what injuries he could before guiding the group back toward the waiting shuttle. On the bridge, Cole watched the reports come in one after another, each successful rescue accompanied by a growing awareness that time was running short. The Karathi fleet had closed nearly half the distance to their position, and though the ships showed no immediate sign of preparing an attack, Cole knew that could change in an instant. Naomi, he called through the comm. Status update. 23 survivors recovered. 3 more locations identified. Naomi's voice came back, tense but steady. We need at least 20 more minutes. Cole glanced at the display, calculating the closing distance of the approaching fleet against the time Naomi requested. The numbers were close, closer than he liked, but not yet impossible. You've got 15, he said. Move fast. The next 15 minutes stretched into what felt like hours aboard the Meridian's bridge, each report from the shuttle teams bringing both relief and mounting tension. More survivors were recovered, brought aboard in small groups, their gratitude evident even through the language barrier that still separated them from their rescuers. But with each passing minute, the Karathi fleet drew closer, its intentions still unclear, but its presence increasingly impossible to ignore. Finally, as the last shuttle began its return journey toward the Meridian, carrying Sael, Naomi, and a final group of exhausted survivors, the Karathi fleet altered course, moving to intercept. They're changing heading, Ines announced, her voice tight with tension. They're coming straight for us. Cole's hands tightened on the console in front of him. Get that shuttle aboard, now. The final moments of the rescue operation played out with agonizing slowness, the shuttle racing toward the Meridian's docking bay, as the Karathi fleet closed the remaining distance with unsettling speed. Cole watched the display, every instinct urging him to break formation and retreat immediately, but he held steady, refusing to abandon the shuttle still carrying his people, and the survivors they had risked everything to save. Shuttle docked, Liam's voice finally announced, relief evident even through the strain in his tone. Everyone's aboard, Captain. Then we're leaving, Cole said immediately, already guiding the Meridian into a tight turn away from the approaching fleet. Full power to engines. Get us out of here. The ship surged forward, engines straining, as it pulled away from the wreckage field and the closing Korathi fleet behind it. For a tense moment, it seemed the pursuing ships might close the distance regardless. But as the Meridian pushed toward the system's edge, the fleet gradually fell back, apparently unwilling or unable to follow into the deeper darkness beyond. On the bridge, the crew allowed themselves a brief moment of relief, though the tension of the past hours lingered heavily in the air. Cole turned to find Sael standing nearby, exhaustion evident in every line of their posture, but something else present as well, a quiet, steady gratitude that needed no translation. "Thank you," Sael said simply, the words careful but clear. Cole nodded, understanding the weight behind the simple phrase. "We're not finished yet," he said, "but we're going to keep trying, for as long as it takes." As the Meridian continued its retreat toward the safety of deeper space, carrying dozens of newly rescued survivors alongside those already aboard, Cole knew the battle they had just avoided was far from the last they would face. The Korathi fleet had shown restraint this time, pulling back rather than pursuing into unknown territory. But the reasons behind that restraint remained unclear, and Cole suspected they would not remain cautious forever. Somewhere behind them, in the wreckage-strewn system they had just escaped, a much larger confrontation was already taking shape, one that would test not only the courage of a single Marine crew, but the resolve of an entire alliance, still in its earliest, most fragile moments of formation. Reinforcements arrived 4 days later, a small fleet led by Colonel Daniel Marsh himself, who had insisted on personally overseeing the response once Cole's report reached the Colonial Council. The additional ships brought supplies, medical support, and enough firepower to finally establish a proper defensive position near the last remaining inhabited Veltari colony, a fragile settlement built into the caverns of a moon that had somehow escaped the worst of the earlier attacks. Marsh met with Cole aboard the Meridian shortly after arrival, reviewing the reports and data gathered over the past week with a growing sense of urgency. The picture that emerged was grim. The Korathi fleet had not retreated in defeat after their encounter with the Meridian. They had regrouped, gathering additional ships from elsewhere in their operation, and intelligence gathered from Veltari sources suggested a much larger assault was being prepared, one intended to finish what the earlier attacks had started. "They're not just harvesting resources anymore," Marsh said, studying the tactical display in the Meridian's briefing room. "They know we're here now. They know Earth exists. This isn't just about the Veltari anymore." Cole nodded grimly. "If they see us as a threat, or worse, a target, then whatever happens here is going to determine how they view humanity going forward." Sael, present for the briefing at Cole's invitation, listened with visible concern. Over the past week, the young engineer had become an invaluable asset, not only for translation, but for a growing understanding of both Veltari technology and the terrain of their remaining strongholds. "The colony on Thren Moon holds nearly all that remains of our people," Sael said. "If it falls, there will be nothing left to save." Marsh turned to the display, studying the moon's cavern systems, mapped out in detail thanks to Sael's contributions. "Then we hold it," he said simply. "Whatever it takes." The following 2 days were spent in intense preparation. Veltari engineers, guided by Sael and supported by human technical teams, worked to reinforce the colony's defenses, converting peaceful infrastructure into makeshift barriers and observation points. Marines from both the Meridian and the newly arrived reinforcement fleet spread throughout the cavern systems, familiarizing themselves with the terrain and coordinating defensive positions with their Veltari counterparts. Naomi led a team through the deepest tunnels of the colony, working alongside a group of Veltari volunteers who, despite lacking combat training, proved remarkably resourceful when it came to their own infrastructure. "These tunnels connect to nearly every section of the colony," their guide explained through careful translation. "If your people know how to use them, they could become very difficult for an enemy to navigate." Naomi studied the tunnel map with growing interest. "Then let's make sure we know them better than the Korathi ever could." Meanwhile, Liam and Noah worked with a team near the colony's main entrance, establishing a series of defensive checkpoints designed to slow any advancing force long enough for the deeper defenses to respond. The work was exhausting, but the sense of shared purpose between human and Veltari teams grew stronger with each passing hour, built not on words alone, but on the simple, steady rhythm of people working together toward a common goal. Cole spent much of his time coordinating between the various defensive positions, ensuring human and Veltari forces remained synchronized despite the language barrier that still occasionally slowed communication. It was during one of these coordination efforts that he found himself standing alongside Sael near the colony's central chamber, watching final preparations take shape around them. "You didn't have to stay," Cole said quietly, glancing at the young engineer. "You could have evacuated with the others. We've already moved to safety." Sael shook their head firmly. "This is my home, my people. I will not leave while there is still something I can do to help defend it." Cole understood that feeling better than most. He had felt it himself, standing on the bridge of the Meridian days earlier, watching burning transports and knowing he could not simply look away. "Then let's make sure that effort counts for something," he said. The Korathi fleet arrived on the third day, their warships descending toward Thren Moon in a formation far larger than anything the defenders had prepared for. Alarms echoed through the cavern systems as the first wave of attacking forces began their approach, and every defender, human and Veltari alike, moved swiftly into position. The initial assault targeted the colony's outer checkpoints, where Liam and Noah's teams held their ground with disciplined precision, using the terrain to their advantage exactly as planned. Attacking forces found themselves funneled into narrow approaches where superior numbers meant little against well-prepared defenders who knew every angle of the battlefield. "They're pushing hard on the eastern checkpoint," Liam reported through the comm, tension evident in his voice as the fighting intensified. "We're holding, but they've got more coming." "Reinforcements are on the way," Cole responded, already directing additional teams toward the pressured position. "Hold as long as you can." Deeper within the cavern systems, Naomi's team put their knowledge of the tunnel networks to immediate use, intercepting a smaller force that had attempted to bypass the main defenses entirely. The narrow passages worked exactly as the Veltari guide had predicted, forcing the attacking group into a position where their numbers provided no advantage, allowing Naomi's smaller but better prepared team to hold the position with minimal difficulty. Throughout the colony, the pattern repeated itself again and again, defenders using intimate knowledge of the terrain, combined with disciplined human tactics, to counter an enemy force that relied primarily on overwhelming numbers and firepower. It was not an easy fight, and losses occurred on both sides as the hours stretched into what felt like an endless struggle. But slowly, steadily, the defensive lines held. Cole moved between positions throughout the engagement, coordinating efforts and providing support wherever the pressure grew too intense. At one particularly difficult moment, word reached him that the eastern checkpoint, held by Liam and Noah's team, had come under such heavy pressure that a breach seemed imminent. "I need reinforcements now," Liam's voice came through, strained but controlled. "We can't hold much longer without support." Cole made the decision immediately, redirecting a portion of the reserve forces toward the struggling checkpoint. He moved with them personally, arriving just as the defensive line began to waver under the weight of a renewed assault. The additional support arrived at the critical moment, stabilizing the position and allowing the defenders to push back the advancing force just enough to maintain their ground. Throughout it all, Sael remained near the central command position, providing real-time guidance based on knowledge of the colony's layout, helping coordinate movements between human and Veltari forces with growing confidence, despite the chaos surrounding them. It was a role far removed from anything the young engineer had ever expected to play, but one performed with a steadiness that earned quiet respect from every Marine who worked alongside them that day. As the hours wore on, the initial ferocity of the Korathi assault began to show signs of strain. The defenders' unexpected resilience, combined with the disadvantageous terrain, gradually eroded the attacking force's momentum. What had begun as a seemingly overwhelming assault slowed into a grinding standoff, neither side able to claim decisive advantage, but the defenders, against all expectations, continuing to hold their ground. It was Marsh, coordinating from the reinforcement fleet still positioned above the moon, who first noticed the shift in the Korathi fleet's behavior. Their ships are pulling back from direct engagement, he reported to Cole. I think we've broken their momentum. Cole allowed himself a brief moment of cautious relief, though the fighting on the ground continued in scattered pockets throughout the colony. Keep the pressure on, he responded. Let's make sure this holds. As evening fell over Thren Moon, marked more by the dimming of artificial lights within the cavern systems than any natural cycle, the Karathi assault gradually withdrew entirely, their remaining forces retreating back toward their fleet, in a disorganized manner that suggested the defenders' resistance had exceeded anything they had anticipated. The defensive lines, battered and exhausted but ultimately unbroken, held firm as the last attacking forces disappeared from the colony's perimeter. The cost of that victory, however, was not without weight. Among the defenders who had given everything to protect the colony, several Marines and Veltari volunteers had fallen during the fighting, their sacrifice a somber reminder that this triumph, however significant, had not come without genuine loss. Cole moved through the aftermath with Sael at his side, both of them silent as they passed the areas where the fighting had been fiercest, acknowledging in quiet respect the price that had been paid to hold the line. We held, Naomi said softly, finding Cole near the colony's central chamber, as the immediate aftermath settled into an exhausted, watchful calm. Against everything they threw at us, we held. Cole nodded, though the weight of the day's losses remained heavy in his chest. We did, he said, but this isn't over, not by a long way. Sael, standing nearby, looked out over the colony that had, against all odds, survived the day's assault. You did more than anyone could have asked, they said quietly. You gave us a chance we never thought we would have. Cole considered the words carefully before responding. You gave us the chance to be more than we might have been, he said. This wasn't just your fight. It became ours too, the moment we chose not to look away. As night settled fully over Thren Moon, the defenders began the long process of recovery, tending to the wounded, honoring those who had been lost, and preparing for whatever might come next. The Karathi fleet remained visible at the edge of sensor range, its intentions uncertain, but for the first time since the crisis began, the defenders of Thren Moon allowed themselves to believe that survival, and perhaps even something greater than survival, remained within reach. The days following the battle at Thren Moon passed in a strange mixture of quiet relief and lingering uncertainty. The Karathi fleet had withdrawn beyond sensor range entirely, offering no indication of when, or if, they might return. For the defenders who had held the line, human and Veltari alike, the reprieve offered a chance to breathe, to grieve, and slowly, to begin rebuilding what had nearly been lost. Colonel Marsh remained on site, to oversee the transition from crisis to recovery, coordinating with both the Colonial Council and the surviving Veltari leadership to determine what would come next. It was a delicate process, made more complicated by the knowledge that Earth's involvement in this conflict, however well-intentioned, had fundamentally changed the nature of the threat they now faced. The Karathi no longer viewed the Veltari as their only concern. Humanity had entered their awareness as well, and there was no way to know how that awareness would shape their future actions. Cole found himself spending increasing amounts of time with Sael during this period, the two of them developing a friendship built on shared hardship and mutual respect that neither had anticipated when their unlikely alliance first began. It was during one of these conversations, held in the quiet of the colony's central chamber, as reconstruction efforts continued around them, that Sael raised a question that had clearly been weighing heavily on their mind. What happens now? Sael asked. Your people came here to answer a call for help. That call has been answered. Will you return home, now that the immediate danger has passed? Cole considered the question carefully before responding. That's not entirely up to me, he admitted. But I don't think this is something either of our people can simply walk away from. Not anymore. Sael studied him thoughtfully. Because the Karathi now see your people as a threat as well. Partly, Cole acknowledged. But it's more than that. We came here because your people needed help, and that hasn't changed. If anything, it matters more now than it did before. The conversation proved prophetic. Within days, formal discussions began between representatives of the Colonial Council and the surviving Veltari leadership, facilitated in large part by the trust that had been built between the two peoples during the crisis. Sael, despite youth and inexperience in matters of diplomacy, was called upon repeatedly to assist in these discussions, valued for the unique perspective gained through direct experience, alongside the human defenders. The negotiations were not without difficulty. Some among the Veltari leadership remained hesitant, wary of forming deep ties with a species so recently unknown to them, concerned that alliance with Earth might only deepen the target painted on their people by the Karathi threat. Similarly, certain voices within the Colonial Council continued to question the wisdom of formal involvement in a conflict that had begun entirely outside human space, worried about the resources and risk such involvement might demand going forward. It was Marsh, drawing on the trust earned through the actions of Cole's crew and the shared sacrifice at Thren Moon, who ultimately helped bridge these remaining doubts. Standing before both councils, during a joint session held within the rebuilt central chamber of the colony, he offered words that would later be remembered as a defining moment in the earliest days of the alliance between Earth and the Veltari people. "We did not come here seeking alliance, or advantage, or anything beyond the simple obligation to answer a call for help," Marsh said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "But in answering that call, we found something neither of our peoples expected, a foundation of trust, built not on words, but on actions taken when it mattered most. That foundation does not disappear simply because the immediate danger has passed. If anything, it becomes more important now, as we face a threat that clearly intends to challenge us both." The words resonated deeply within the chamber, and in the days that followed, formal terms of alliance began to take shape. The Veltari, whose civilization excelled in technology far beyond current human capability, offered to share knowledge that could strengthen Earth's defenses and infrastructure. In return, Earth committed resources toward rebuilding what the Karathi had destroyed, along with a pledge of continued protection for what remained of Veltari territory. For Cole and his crew, the formal signing of this alliance marked a strange transition from soldiers on a dangerous mission to something closer to ambassadors, representatives of humanity's first true partnership with a species beyond their own. It was a role none of them had trained for, but one they approached with the same steady dedication that had carried them through the crisis itself. Naomi, in particular, found herself drawn into ongoing discussions about shared defensive strategies, her tactical insight proving valuable not only for the immediate concerns of ongoing Karathi activity, but for the longer-term challenge of building a combined defense capable of protecting both peoples going forward. Liam and Noah, meanwhile, worked alongside Veltari engineers on rebuilding efforts, applying both human resourcefulness and Veltari technological knowledge to restore what had been damaged during the conflict. Sael, for their part, emerged from the crisis transformed, no longer simply a young engineer caught in circumstances beyond their control, but a respected voice, bridging two civilizations now bound together by shared struggle and hard-earned trust. It was Sael who, during one of the final ceremonies marking the formal establishment of the alliance, offered words that captured the spirit of everything that had unfolded over the preceding weeks. "We called into the darkness, not knowing if anyone would answer," Sael said, addressing the gathered representatives of both peoples. "We did not expect help to come from a species we had never known existed, but it did, not because we offered anything in return, but because somewhere out there, people who did not know us heard our call and chose to answer anyway. That choice changed everything for my people. I believe it will change everything for both our peoples, for a very long time to come." As the ceremony concluded, Cole stood near the edge of the gathering, watching as human Marines and Veltari citizens mingled together in a scene that would have seemed impossible only weeks earlier. He thought back to the moment the distress signal had first been detected, the uncertainty and debate that had surrounded the decision to respond, and the long, difficult journey that had followed in the time since. Marsh approached, standing quietly beside him for a long moment before speaking. "You did good work out here, Captain. Better than anyone expected, myself included." Cole shook his head slightly. "We just did what needed doing. Answered a call for help, same as anyone would." "Not everyone," Marsh said. "Not everyone would have made that choice, especially not with the risks involved. But you did, and because of that choice, we've gained something far more valuable than we could have imagined when this mission began." Cole looked out over the rebuilding colony, the mixture of human and Veltari structures rising together, from what had once been devastation. "We didn't just gain an ally," he said quietly. "We proved something about who we are, when it actually mattered." The following weeks brought steady progress, as the fragile alliance between Earth and the Veltari continued to strengthen through shared effort and mutual support. Reports continued to filter in regarding Korathi activity elsewhere in the galaxy, confirming Sciel's earlier warnings about a larger conflict building beyond what either civilization had yet fully understood. But for the first time since the crisis began, neither humanity nor the Veltari faced that looming threat alone. Cole received new orders eventually, directing the 3rd Shadow Battalion to return briefly to human space for debriefing and resupply before beginning what would become an ongoing partnership between Earth's forces and the rebuilding Veltari defense network. As the Meridian prepared for departure, Sciel arrived at the docking bay to see them off, along with several other Veltari who had grown close to the crew during the preceding weeks. "This isn't goodbye," Sciel said, addressing Cole directly, as the crew made final preparations. "You'll return, and we will continue building what we've started here." "We will," Cole confirmed. "This is just the beginning." As the Meridian pulled away from Thren Moon, beginning its long journey back toward human space, Cole stood once more near the observation window, watching the colony grow smaller in the distance, its lights now steady and strong, rather than scattered by desperation and fear. He thought of the long path that had led them here, from a broken distress signal barely understood, to a genuine alliance built on trust, earned through shared hardship and sacrifice. Behind them, the darkness of unexplored space stretched onward, holding within it both the looming threat of the Korathi and the promise of a partnership strong enough to face that threat together. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Cole knew his crew, and the alliance they had helped forge, would face them not as strangers, separated by unfamiliar origins, but as partners bound by something far stronger than circumstance alone. The stars ahead remained as vast and unknown as they had been when this journey first began, but for the first time, humanity did not face that vastness alone. Somewhere out there, among the countless worlds still unexplored, other voices might yet call out for help in the darkness, and now, more than ever, there would be those ready and willing to answer.